This is Theology Bits with Pastor Ben, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. This week, in our ongoing study on continuity in change, is focusing on the Patriarchs and Matriarchs of the book of Genesis. In this installment of continuity and change, remember, we're focusing on what is different than what we had before. And the period of the Patriarchs, we already did one of these videos on Abraham, but it does begin with Abraham. It's really Genesis 12 to 50. And it's structured around the question of covenant, which we talked quite a bit about in our last video, and blessing, which we didn't speak as much about, but we kind of hinted at it as we discussed the topic. And we had the first of the patriarchs is, of course, Abraham. And then we have Isaac, Jacob, and finally Joseph. These are the four patriarchs of the book of Genesis. So in Abraham, as a review from last time, there was a focus on covenant. There had been covenant already in the primeval history, but a very different kind of covenant, and a very much a particular question of who are you in relationship to everyone else. Very different than the focus in the primeval history, which was about how is human flourishing succeeding over against the power of death. That's what you had in Genesis 1 to 11. Here it's this question of covenant, of what is your land, again, as compared to others, and your offspring. And you'll recall that this is structuring the people of God very much as a family, meaning the family of this one particular person. That's why they call it a patriarch, Abraham. And of course, it's all about offspring, but the story is more complicated than that, though, isn't it? As most of you know, Abraham did not just have one child. There's all this drama about the children of Abraham with Hagar and Sarah as the dynamic between them, leading to Abraham's first child, Ishmael, and then second, Isaac. And then we have the question of covenant. And what we discover very quickly in this is that Ishmael and Hagar are not going to have the covenant. God does provide a promise to those figures, but it's not the same covenant that Abraham had. That only goes to Isaac. This is something that we can forget because of the drama in the book of Genesis between Sarah and Hagar, and how Ishmael gets born at all, with Hagar being the slave that Sarah forces to have a child with Abraham. That is all there, but sometimes we forget the fundamental purpose of this is there is one heir who gets the covenant and not the other. And this becomes significant because at the very end of the narrative of Abraham, he says, after the death of Sarah, Abraham had other wives and other children. It's only a quick comment, but it's odd that it's there. And in fact, at his funeral, all these other wives and other children show up, and who are these people? But again, they're not going to get the covenant. Only one of the offsprings, one of the heir, gets the covenant. That's something we can sometimes forget. Here, we then have the narrative of Isaac, and I'm going to put this in parentheses because in the book of Genesis, there's not really a narrative of Isaac. Isaac is a character in the Abraham narrative and a character in the Jacob narrative, but he really doesn't have a strong narrative the way that the other three patriarchs do. But for our purposes here, the thing that we want to focus on is, once again, multiple children. We have Esau and we have Jacob. And unlike the narrative with Abraham with these other children, there's no drama of multiple women who are bearing the children. It's the same one. But what happens, as you know from the narrative, that Jacob, the younger, steals or tricks his way into the birthright, getting Esau to give it up for a cup of soup, and the blessing, where he out and out deceives his father, pretending to be Esau, and receives the blessing that should have been Esau's. That drama, again, we sometimes can get lost in that a little bit, and we forget the fundamental same dynamic. The covenant that, remember, Isaac has, because it was given from Abraham, is only going to go to one of the children. Esau does not get that covenant. Esau is treated well by God, but does not have that. Only Jacob gets this covenant. And here we get this importance of the birthright and the blessing. Birthright is structure of land. The blessing, what is that? It is, are you the one who is going to have this covenant given to you? The covenant God gives, is it going to be with your family? See, the question is, family, sure, it's a family structure. Whose family? Fine when it's just Abraham, but now there's multiple descendants. Is it all the descendants of Abraham? Or is it just Abraham to one child and that person's family and that person's family? Meaning, is it always just a nuclear family? Or an extended family? This is going to be one of the fundamental questions that arises. Then we have the Jacob narrative. And the Jacob narrative starts like we would be expecting this same thing. It starts, there are 12 children, but only one is favored. And you could just see it setting up, that Joseph is clearly the favored. And with, if we thought it was complicated with two mothers involved here, there's 4 this time. And so it gets really confusing. But the children of Rachel, the 2 sons of Rachel, are clearly favored and are getting set up for, you're going to get the blessing and the covenant and not the others, for which Joseph's brothers hate him. And this whole system gets thrown out of whack because, as everyone knows in the Joseph story, his brothers set him up and set him off into Egypt, convince their father Jacob that Joseph has been killed, and they start doing the same thing. Benjamin, the other child of Rachel, is getting set up in this same system, and then the drama of Genesis 37 to 50, which is, as if you don't know the story of Joseph very well, pause this video right now and go read Genesis 37 to 50. It is one of the most beautiful short stories ever written in some ways, and I just recommend that you spend some time with it. But in this narrative, everything gets thrown asunder. Joseph, starting enslaved in Egypt, ends up becoming the second in command for Pharaoh and in the royal house and in the ruling class. And everything that we thought we understood has been abrogated, and it's new. And then at the very end, and there's a lot going on there, but for our purposes, what I want to emphasize is at the very end, when Joseph reconciles with his brothers, forgives his brothers, and he goes and sees his father, Then we have Jacob here, ready to provide the blessing to Joseph as we would have expected, but then he doesn't do it. Two other figures show up, Ephraim and Manasseh. Who are these people? These are Joseph's two sons. And what happens? Jacob puts his hands on both of their heads and blesses both of them. This is new. Now both Ephraim and Manasseh, both of Joseph's sons, receive the covenant. It is no longer going to be one versus the other. One versus the other. It will now be both. And Joseph himself objects to Jacob's behavior. And Jacob says, and they're speaking about, I believe it's Manasseh here, the younger. Why are you doing this? And he says, because he also will be a great nation and his name will be great. And if you're hearing resonances to what God promised Abraham in the covenant, you should, because this is a completely new thing. Whose family are the people of God? It will be the extended family. And not just the extended family here of just the two sons of Joseph, but then the two sons of Joseph and all their sons. Is Joseph going to have any more children? Well, they're going to be included too. Implied is there is now room for multiplicity rather than uniformity and singularity. That now the family of God is going to be bigger so that it is all the offspring, not just an offspring. It will no longer be a right of inheritance, the way we think of inheritance in wills, but instead a right of descent, which is something that comes to you if you are genealogically related, whether or not you're stated in a will. A person can be chosen to be excluded from someone's will. Some people leave none of their children to be heirs, but you cannot be excluded from being in the genealogy of your ancestors, that you are descendants. There is multiplicity. And what you discover very quickly in any genealogy is not how few people are in it, but how many. Some of you know that in genealogical structures, you've done those 23andMe and did this, and you discover all these relatives you never knew you had. Well, I think that idea is already here, that this multiplicity is going to include many more. It's still a family, but a very, very extended family. This is new, and it is a new development as we move forward. And who were they, and who are we in continuity, in change as the people of God? This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.